I want to show you why this like sort of becomes like very true even in the first place, right? We think breaking cultural barriers is like very true for this particular motion because the world we live in looks like I already showed you, looks like one that is already characterized by this dominant narrative that go to disenfranchise certain communities and minorities even in the first place, right? So at the point where we inherently want to challenge this particular dominant narrative and promote things like cross-cultural understanding, we think that becomes a sort of very important. Why is this like important to break down those particular cultural barriers? Firstly, we think on this side, we're much more likely to receive two things. A, we're much more likely to receive things like equity, but even two, we're much more likely going to be able to receive things like social justice because like at that point in time, it becomes like sort of like very diverse when voices are inherently had, but even the fact that we inherently go ahead to like sort of include people, we think that becomes like sort of very important. And our side, we are much more likely to receive like very many benefits than what their side inherently is much more likely going to tell you, right? We think at that point in time, even on a comparative level, while we go ahead to highlight the experiences and struggles of marginalized communities in this particular inclusive literary canons, we think that's too like is sort of like very important, right? On a sort of like comparative, we think what our side looks like, it already has like some sort of inclusivity, some sort of equality, even in the first place. Their side inherently does not have any of that, and what we inherently expect of is to show us on a principled basis why at a point in time they're much more likely going to like sort of like help out those minority communities, those marginalized people in the first place. With that, I'll have to rest.
Thank you.
I'll assume that I'm quite audible. Davis, could you kindly mute, please? So I wouldn't love any interruptions. I may be setting up my timer. Yeah. Okay, I just need to confirm that I'm quite clear and audible.
Can whoever has unmuted, first of all, mute Verrasant? Good, okay. Yes, you're audible.
Yeah, Davis, could you kindly mute? Anyway, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, the thing that we get from props rhetoric is that essentially a human being or something being unique is something that is bad. Just because that uniqueness holds an important power in seeking the equity that government actually wants, as we are going to show you from our side. Panel, 3 things that you're going to get from my speech. Firstly, a clear contextualization of where we think this debate actually is. Then secondly, you're going to get 2 arguments from my speech. Then thirdly, a build up on the third argument of at how best the inclusive literary canon that government is talking about actually dissolves the main intention of art and what these canons are meant to protect. From Ian's speech, my second. Firstly, what exactly is this debate about? 1, panel, clearly this debate is whether I would actually want inclusivity in things such as art, such as music genres, or even in and of itself in art such as drawing, versus whether I would actually prefer a world where each different genre is as it is and is actually kept as it is without it being diluted. Panel, put it simply and in a very clear way, whether I would actually have various genres such as amapiano standing alone or have a mix-up. Panel, from all, we think it would rather be better to have each on its own. What do we think a literal canon would actually look like? 3 key things. Panel, this literal canon is heavily independent. That is, it doesn't lean on or it doesn't include any other beliefs that the people that run that literal canon actually don't believe. But panel, notice, this in no way does it limit the people who subscribe or listen to this literal canon from actually listening to other literal canons. That is to say that it doesn't necessarily stop someone who actually is a South African and heavily understands and listens to my piano from actually listening to other genres. What it rather does to them is it incentivizes them listen to their genre and promote it. Panel, that's why entirely will necessarily actually get the development of these literature canons in that way. That's why Amapiano is spread all over the world. Second, we think that these literature canons, when they stand independently and are not inclusive, are heavily informative. But I notice that this is very important because it then provides two key things. One, an avenue for these people to actually highlight out to the world the problems that they face. Let it be racism, such as what was done in pop culture by the Black Americans, or let it be any other social prejudice that necessarily fake. You don't get this from prose work because they quash that by having inclusivity, and in most instances, the main intention of these arts are then derailed from their main purpose. This is something that will heavily come in Ian's speech and argument. The third thing that is very important, and is one of the main things that we actually think these literature canons are, is that they are deeply rooted in specific cultures and beliefs. This helps in basically two ways. One, it helps in spreading those cultures and beliefs and unite the people that actually believe in it. This means that in most instances, they're actually going to be incentivized and will most likely stand up to actually fight against social prejudices, but even secondly, also showing injustice. But even secondly, they'll be far much better to actually spread and help other people understand what their cultures are about. You don't get that in government's world, and this debate is highly comparative. Pano, clearly, this whole context about this independent literary canon then quashes out everything about the principle of responsibility that government actually tried to favorably run. Onto my first argument on why it won't work. This argument is clearly going to counteract the whole thing of representation and breaking cultural biases that government tried to run. Firstly, on how this uniqueness then gives us our creativity and innovation that would so much want. Three key things here. Pando, the only way in which you get the preservation of art or of culture is by keeping it as unique as it is, and in no way by actually diluting it. Pando, the reason as to why tribes or the reason as to why cultures have actually stood and have been strong up to now is because they haven't been intermixed. In the instance where you actually have intermarriages, one, you get the dissolution of these original cultures, but even second, you get the demise of these cultures in most instances. The key thing to note here is from up, we think we would not have had classics such as Beethoven produced or even Renaissance art by the Michelangelos done if these things were not kept as independent as they were, or these drawing arts were not kept as independent as they were. That's why they are treated as great. That's why they are treated as important. That's why the people earn from them. At such a point in time, when you remove that uniqueness, we think then you remove the creativity and innovation that people could have used to break down barriers, as was done by Beethoven and very many other great classics. The second thing is about the misunderstanding of the concept behind these pieces of art and why then that becomes harmful, basically quashing government's case. Pan, notice government tells us that they are aimed at having this for having equity and having this for having perhaps represented at a global scale. The main thing here is if you don't get people interested in your work of art, or if you don't actually work as hard as that to get them interested in it, it then becomes meaningless because the concept behind it is not understood, or you're not actually understood by other people. Noticing, Pano, that art is one of the main way how people of different cultures have been able to understand each other. That's why Americans that are not necessarily black are deeply rooted in pop culture because they now understand what it means. Pano, you are only able to get that by having pop culture and having pop music independent as it stands right now. Without that, you didn't have had that inclusivity and that equity. You don't get that from government. The third main thing under this argument is then about how it creates a certain sort of instability. Two key things here. Pano, notice that the world that we live in is very highly prejudiced against things that they don't understand. So in a world whereby you're either going to mix up things and not let people understand, then becomes harmful to try and sort out this prejudice. That means that in most instances, you still leave people pitted against your culture. But if you're going to promote it, you're going to help people understand it and keep it as original as it is, we think you'll have people understood and basically invested in. But the second intuitive thing here is that in most instances, people are actually scared of change. They are necessarily not ready to accept that what they believe in should actually just be brainwashed and backwashed simply because you want inclusivity. What they would rather have is you fighting out and making sure that your work can be understood as original as it was. The main thing behind this argument is for you to have representation, or if you want to break any cultural biases. It should be better for you to keep your culture intact as it was, and that would be the only way you'd get it. On to my second argument on why necessarily at the end of the day we then get this sort of inclusivity government wanted. This is through our second argument on how all perspectives are expressed. The main analysis that I have under this argument is how necessarily these genres or these arts or these canons being independent then led to the formation of social justice movement. But notice with the emergence of pop culture and it being heavily understood by many people across the world, they're able to understand that the blacks in America were also people. But what this led to was the acceptance of black persons as equals, them being dignified. You don't get this from government. Why? Because they necessarily have this brand of black people then diluted into others and removed. At such a point in time, we think it then becomes harmful if you want to actually get that equity. Secondly, on how you necessarily get all these perspectives exposed, and this is like literally the main thing, by the fact that you have every culture or every art running its independent genre, we think entirely the world will have like a whole diversity or a whole diet of arts to actually pick from. Panel from team opposition, we think it's very important that you remain autonomous and independent for you to progress as an art. Panel with that, proud to oppose.
Thank you. We can have Davis.
Clearly, Pano, you need to understand, right? Society is something which is ever evolving, right? By the people it was intended for, right? Meaning that people should have less of the problems of prejudice which did exist back then when these particular canons did exist for those particular reasons, right? And particularly, Pano, what is the reason you see that within modern day society versus then, right? Particularly, Pano, it's because, right, there's now a range of diversification in today's society, right? Same way people now can move from one place to another, study within same schools and so on. We believe that the same effects this literature would have if it's made a literal canon. It means it would now actually become more accessed by more people, meaning more people can actually get to understand it. What practically making it what actually fulfill its purpose on our case of what actually combating the issues these people are trying to talk about and so on, right? And particularly panel number 2, right? On their side, we also get a hint of the premise that by actually keeping this particular literature works independent and so on, you actually get to preserve the culture. Right now this comes into rebuttal of our character, comes to rebuttal it from our characterization of, we try to tell you the world we're living in is more of contemporary, right? So meaning this is a world where, particular norms and values keep on changing from all the time, right? Particularly things which were considered wrong back then are actually now having debates to see their moral ground, right? Things which were not allowed back then are now seen as a new trend of normal. For instances, right? Things such as gender swapping and so on, those are now things which are generally normal. So like we feel the purpose those things could have been written for, as much it can't hold some ground, right? But in a contemporary society, you come to realize this isn't something which can be valued as much. So that would mean these things are going to be overlooked and so on, and not taken as seriously as side opposition is trying to say if we keep them independent, right? Because now take this particular case study, right? You come to realize over 65% of the population is more acquainted with what fictional characters such as Gorgeous Satoru or Iron Man compared to what classics such as what Romeo and Juliet or what Michelangelo, Picasso's paintings. Like these people are becoming more and more obsolete as the time moves on, right? And then particularly number two, you also need to look into these particular case studies where you find like these particular redos of these classics actually getting more hype and buzz than their original counterparts, right? So that's clearly showing you that like the society which we live in right now really doesn't hold a lot of the values and premises that side proposition is trying to talk about, but rather you find those things more of died back then, right? Now, back to building our case, right? Particularly, we go under two main things, right? We're trying to promote the diverse voices and representation and so on. And particularly, panel number two, we're also trying to promote like equality and so on, right? So particularly, panel, how does our side try to promote these diverse voices, right? One thing you also need to understand is by the time these particular works were done, they're trying to keep independent, right? What was this time looking like? And what was the moral equations back then, right? Particularly, you come to realize these works were written by people back then who didn't have like already sharing ideals with what other parts of the population and so on, right? And in a time where a majority of some of these beliefs are now considered like very wrong, in a time where they were considered righteous, you come to realize what you're now not actually promoting like a version of diversification, but rather you're trying to defend what beliefs which were considered as wrong being kept on right now, right? Things such as slavery, things such as what colonization, like particularly those beliefs are what people who had those beliefs are the ones who find most of these what art pieces belonging to and forms of literature. On top of that, you also need to also realize what I had a focus on content, right? This is generally the approach which emphasizes the content. This is generally the approach which emphasizes the content and messages of those works, right? Which led to discussions about society and historical context. But literally, in today's society, you find that doesn't actually work about, right? And particularly, also, you need to look into the accessibility of this particular work, which side opposition is trying to keep what as literary canon, right? You need to understand, right? We give you earlier that particularly people in this particular society we live in today are not going to be what generally interested with them, right? So, Pan, what does that mean for side opposition's case, right? That brings about the flow that particularly the message which they would want to bring about and its particular importance. Even if we do take them at that, you come to realize particularly the lack of interest these people have, this is going to mean like this is not going to be accessible in whatever sense of the word, right? People are not literally interested in it. They would rather go for other forms of literature which are much more simpler and more enjoyable and more accessible, right? So particularly what this means is that what their particular ideals still can't be met in the society in which today's debate runs in. I'll take your POI. 3.
All right. What makes you think that even in the contemporary world, art cannot be expressed independently without need for dissolution?
We believe art can be what particularly expressed independently, but what our particular issue is the particular art pieces which fall under literary canon, right? Particularly, you see the time in which they were written, the part which they were actually done. You come to realize in this particular society, this means these particular pieces don't stand a lot of weight anymore. So particularly the independence you try to fund for them literally becomes what like so minute in today's society that it really doesn't matter as much as you're trying to bring it to. And particularly panel. Back to what we said earlier, the people who actually made the literary canons back then, and particularly the groups of people they were, right? You particularly come to realize other forms of artworks which were written by that time generally didn't also have the inclusivity factor which they tried to bring about, right? Which they tried to say we failed to get on our side, right? But panel, we believe on our side of the house where if we had to make these what particularly what literal canons instead of the literary, you come to realize inclusivity is actually going to be met more because now particularly these particular acts of work and actually now fit in with actual works made by people of like other differing groups. So now you generally have like a playground where like so many people of so many backgrounds can actually end up working together and actually having their voices being seen, right? Now, panel. Now, the major clash you get into the debate, right, is the prejudice on their side, which existed and which was generally talked about by their particular world, right? And what you get from our side is the diversification and building we are trying to get, right? So particularly panel, you come to realize the major issue in both sides is we're trying to reduce the prejudice because we believe that these particular forms of literature art have like so much contextual meaning and so on, right? So Pano, how do we succeed in this and how do they fail, right? Particularly Pano, it's because in our world we believe that if you have like a diverse range of voices and people coming together, you're not going to have like a lot of prejudice because it's going to be like so much simpler for people to go on. But we want to say, but on their side of the world where you're going to have like things being kept independent, people are not going to be like so interested to figure out other culture, which continues to the prejudice in their particular essence. So that gives a ballot to a proposition. Yeah.
I think
All right, so
go ahead.
I'm going to begin the speech in 3, 2. Actually, I'll take my POIs as a presentation. So this is on Badger. I'll begin this speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Panel. This is a debate between literature being inclusive or literature being independently expressed. There are two worlds in which we are comparing. At a particular point in which affirmative dissolves the main reason as to why art in and of itself is created, then we are proud to win from opposition. 3 things you're going to get from this speech. First is some top-notch clarity. Secondly is on refutation. Thirdly is the extension with our second logic to victory as opposition. First and foremost, I want us to understand what literally canons in and of themselves are. This looks like expressing people's arts and customs through texts like Romeo, Juliet, Odyssey, all that kind of stuff. What then happens? You actively preach your culture. Why is that important? It means that you're able to express yourself for whatever you are and whatever you believe in. Why is this important? It means that if you're trying to advance if you're trying to solve any disenfranchisement, if you're trying to express how good you are or how bad you are, it is still done better because it is done in a more concentrated way from one side of the house. In their end, when their first speaker wanted to come and claim things such as diversity, inclusivity, telling us about social justice, how people have been disenfranchised for far too long, and why the piece of literature is going to improve anyone, a couple of logical links were then missing. First and foremost, we think when you create a sort of blanket literature, which they advance from their side of the house, it is oftentimes created by the majority because these are the people that have the capacity. What then happens? They're able to spread their ideals more. But in their side of the world as prop, these ideals are more taken in because this art is then taken as very legitimate, i.e. the only legitimate form of art that can happen. Why that is dangerous is on 2 reasons. One, it further disenfranchises the majority they were trying to care about, but even secondly, the social justice can never be achieved. Why? Because there is an importance in uniqueness while sorting out any sort of social justice. Look at how women always unite. Look at how different cultures always unite to fight against other cultures or something of that sort. We think it is important for you to respect that uniqueness and not for you to just go on and dissolve for 2 reasons. One, that sort of dissolution fails the reason as to why art was formed in the first instance, but even secondly, it makes you inferior as a minority. That means if prop was to be successful, they make even the minority people more and more marginalized and they worsen everything from their side of the house. Second thing on refutation, when he wanted to come and claim that the society has diversified and like we should just buy into that sort of characterization, I think it was weak for 2 reasons. One, he didn't give us the justification as to why that sort of diversification in and of itself makes it right for me to trade away my identity for a certain identity that is already superior to me, right? But even secondly, I think we can still preach our ideas, i.e. we can still have our own independent literature sold within this contemporary world. Why? Because you having people of different races doesn't stop those different races from actively preaching their own view of culture, their own view of their identity. That is why all their benefits concerning these people being liberated, these people feeling better about themselves are not something that they have uniquely at their end, i.e. we also have them because we have, for example, the Banyankole preaching what they think is right, the people from Nigeria preaching what they think is right, the people from Southern Africa preaching what they think they like. I think that is far more important because it is able to bring out the uniqueness of these individual cultures, and that means they further benefit they themselves as the individuals within the culture, but even people outside of the culture, because you're able to see uniquely another culture and how they do their things. You could probably like it, or you could probably do any sort of thing to that. Why is that important? It means in the world of proposition, where you allow the dissolution of culture, two things then happen. People are propelled to a world where they do the literature for the case of inclusivity rather than for the case of the meaning of that particular art. Why is that most likely? Because people who produce this art always want a lot of buy-in. I.e., if I'm producing my books, I want as many people to buy into my books, and like I get more financial benefits and all that kind of stuff. Why is that important? It means from their end, they are structurally able to look the cultures of individuals in the past. That means they enhance a world of individuals who have forgotten their cultures. They are living without identities. Why is that very dangerous? It means that then individuals' identities start existing in a vacuum. That looks like people without any morals. That looks like people who generally live in a world because they think we are now in a sort of liberal world and we shouldn't care about anything. I can't greet my parent, I can't kneel down because I've seen maybe the Western culture does this or that. That is bad because it shifts the understanding that already exists within society, which has caused a lot of peace. Now on argumentation, three things that you had. First is on the principles why it wouldn't work from Verrasant. Secondly is on how it allows for expression of all perspectives from our side and why that is the most important benefit in this debate. I'm going to be extending on an idea that takes prop at their very best. That is to say, even if we have to accept all the benefits they are talking about, why they then dissolve the main reason as to why art is created. The claim of this argument is simple. Literature is meant to resonate with your beliefs. Before I go on analysis, I'll take a POI.
Engage.
Cool. 3, 2, 1. All right. At a point in time, their side of the house doesn't prove that their literature really resonates with individual people's beliefs, i.e. it doesn't resonate with my culture. I'm just going to buy into it because of like social pressure, because very many people are buying into it. Why is that dangerous? It means that one, in and of themselves, they do not propel the reason as to why art is created. But even secondly, look at the communities that we have. We have poor people, we have minority people, we have rich people, we have majority people. What happens in their end? It is the rich, it is the few people that have that potential to spread that particular art. What then happens? These people are able to spread their narratives to other people. Why is that bad? That is the greatest level of indoctrination we can ever support in this particular world, and we do not think that is justice, right? This argument is inherently important because it shows you why affirmative pushes people to a world where art is meant generally for just including very many people and not at the aim of it having meaning. That is dangerous because the basic and best narratives that art normally propels within society are then eradicated. That looks like a lot of art being made just for very many people to buy into it, but without any morals, without any high campus that is put into it, and I think that is inherently detrimental. So we can agree that if this debate is to be compared, i.e. if we are to put it on a significance of comparison, i.e. on the likelihood metric, our side of the house is more likely to have all their benefits they're talking about, but furthermore, their side of the house is more likely to have the condition worsen because they advance the highest levels of indoctrination we can ever see in this century. And thirdly, and most importantly, our side of the house was more pragmatic because it resonates with what exists in status quo. These were two worlds because it was a preferred motion. In our side of the house, independent cultures are able to independently preach their narratives. They are appreciated and they become better. They are even spread. That was far beneficial because it betters the whole situation they wanted to preach. But even so, it is the best that society desires, and there are more reasons to believe why that is true. After that, Prop then had to come and give us a justification as to why they think indoctrination should be preached, but even secondly and most importantly, why individual people's perspectives are not important, given the fact that our identities are a result of what we were made before. Thank you. I would like to rest.
All right, thank you. Let us have Titus.
Okay. Let me first set my timer. All right. I'm going to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Pano, literature is something that's necessarily very important within society. It is something that controls the narrative of what people inherently think and how they are necessarily going to behave in many situations. We think then Driz's argument became very important on the historical concept because it showed you that there was an importance to inculcate contemporary societies, contemporary ideas, because of a sort of difference in how these things were necessarily like treated in the past. We think that was a very important argument that has got little engagement from opposition. Now, Pan, a major issue within this debate that I think needs clarity is on what canonization actually looks like. Opposition seems to not understand the concept of canonization at all. What canonization looks like is something being held as a classic. That means this particular thing is taught within academic institutions, adding it to their curricula in the first place. It is promoted by so many critics. It is something that's published within media houses. That these classics are what they are going to promote. There are things like cultural institutions like UNESCO are necessarily promoting as classics in this particular regard. That means proposition's stance is simple. We want to have an intentionality in how these things are included, right? We want to have authors from diverse backgrounds being represented in these stages. In a different school, you can have authors from China, Japan being taught. Why? Because we care about the narrative and what different people think. I think that's something that's very important. What this takes away from their case is the idea we get from their first speech that canonization does not stop you from listening to other works. We think that's very wrong because if something is being promoted within the society, it is just intuitive. That's what you're going to be going with. If they want to argue that you can have something else being promoted within society and then you're still listening to something else, they needed to provide some further analysis on that. Now, a major strategic mistake we get from their side is that they assume that we are generally replacing the current things that are canonized or the things that are considered literary canons in society now with new ideas. We think, that's vastly wrong. Our stance is simple. We want more inclusion, but the already existing canonized works will remain canonized. They'll remain considered as classics. What we want is on top of Shakespeare's books and all these books, we get some contemporary books also being canonized in this particular regard. We get music from newer people. We get music from different backgrounds being canonized within this state. Now we think, this debate cannot go on without some sort of problem analysis. What is the issue with canonization that we're debating today? We think, majority of the works that are being canonized within vast majority of the world are majorly Western led. That means works from Europe, the age of Michelangelo and people of that sort. These are the people who are being put at the front. These are the things being considered classics within majority of the world. They do not include individuals from diverse backgrounds. For example, it would be very difficult for you to find a book from Okot Pibitek being promoted within the vast, being canonized or being promoted within the vast majority of media. We think that's the biggest problem. But then secondly, we think an idea that does not include contemporary society. Davis clearly explained to you how that becomes detrimental because of particular messages that were actually acceptable within those particular times that are not acceptable anymore, that are still being preached within these books that are being promoted. And we showed you why that's detrimental. That's why you find that songs like Blinding Lights that have sold more copies than songs like Elvis Presley's music are still not being canonized or are still not being considered as classics. We think on the issue of buy-in, they cannot then argue on that account. Now, into the clashes. The first clash we see here is on what best preserves the importance of this work. What they tell you is that when we sort of become inclusive and start including other cultures and the contemporary society within what we canonize, they tell you that necessarily takes away the importance of these particular things. But there are two reasons why we win this particular clash. The first is the fact that they sort of have individuals lacking the buy-in into these particular things that are being canonized. We think that if the sort of art that's being promoted are things that people cannot relate with, notice that the world is increasingly diverse, right? You find a country like Sweden being mostly comprised of individuals that are not even citizens of that particular country, right? Countries like the United Arab Emirates are being comprised of so many different cultures of individuals. You note that with that increasing diversity within the world, there is inherently a need for these particular individuals to be diverse within the things that they canonize in their particular society. We think at that point, if these particular things lose buy-in, they inherently lose their value. That's why you find that in current status quo, like books like Romeo and Juliet are still struggling to get like the sort of buy-in that they did get some time back, and yet they're meant to be like classics. We think that's dangerous. Why? Because if the things that are being promoted within media are not having buy-in, it means it makes art lose its essence in itself. That makes that the prop case, like the op case, very dangerous, because if art in itself is losing its like value, or is losing how people necessarily view it, because the art that's being promoted has lost its particular buy-in, then art in itself is going to lose its particular like importance. If that happens, it means that there'll be an essential like breakdown in the effect that literature necessarily has on society. That becomes detrimental, because within this debate, we're trying to see how we can best utilize this particular literature in its case. So we think their side loses that particular importance. And in terms of like problem solvency, they do not solve the particular problem. What they do, like the problem of like art lacking these particular individuals being interested in it, what they do is like causing a particular problem. We think on terms of importance, if they do not involve contemporary society or things that individuals can relate to, they lose their buy-in for art. And if they continue promoting things that people have no buy-in for, they are going to necessarily just inherently make art lose its essence in itself, and no one's going to be like caring about this art in the first place. On the comparative, proposition provides you a world where we necessarily like canonize or promote these particular like things that people can relate with, contemporary like ideas and culturally diverse ideas. We get more buy-in and we make more people interested in art. As you become more interested in art, you could even start listening to these classical works of like Michelangelo even more. You could even become more like impressed with this particular art and go on. But if you start with something that you're not even interested in, we think that's dangerous. Now, second clash here is on culture. They claim that what we are trying to do is change people's culture, and we lack buy-in, and because we don't have that particular culture, and what we exist, and that exists less on our side. Pano, the reason why we win on this case is two things. Firstly, is the fact that they misunderstand our case and our stance, as I already explained to you. We tell you that what we are doing is not doing away with particular cultures or replacing particular things within these things. We think we're just being intentional in involving so many different things within what we canonize and what we promote. We want to like have these things more promoted within society, but having them from diverse authors, meaning that in one like particular national library, we can have books from different authors that are being promoted by critics, that are being taught within school curricula and all those sorts of things. Now, we think, secondly, on why we win is the idea that we diversify the media narrative. Opposition's first speaker talked about their side being highly informative. We think that's necessarily wrong, right? Our side becomes more informative at the point at which it diversifies the narrative that individuals like are placed into their head. We think that's an important reason why we win, because we diversify that particular narrative. We think we win this debate on problem solvency. We win this debate on how we like necessarily control the narrative and use it for good reasons, and on the importance of this particular literature and how we like essentially keep its value. I rest.
All right. Thank you. We can have the third negative speaker, Peter.
Just for confirmation, can I be heard?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, just a second. Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair, one thing we have to understand within today's debate is that one of the things that we front from our side is and is not understood by side affirmative is the nature to why or the reason to why art was created. understand from all of affirmative side, they talk about art and mixing of art, but they do not talk about why art was particularly created. That is one thing that we look at preserving, and within my speech, I will necessarily re-echo the reason why the preservation of art is generically important within today's debate. Chair, you will expect three things for my speech. One, I'll do a direct engagement with the case of side affirmative. Secondly, I'll bring to you the clashes and weigh them up and show you why we particularly win or comparative from their side. Chair, there are two major clashes in today's debate. The first major clash is which side opens a room for higher diversity. Second, and most importantly, is which side creates a room for higher levels of representation and inclusivity. But first and foremost, in rebuttal, what does side affirmative particularly tell us? One of the things side affirmative tells us is that when we increase or when we open room for each and every art to be expressed, or each and every canon to be expressed, there'll be representation. That means that there'll be breaking down cultural barriers and there'll be social justice and equity. Chair, I'm going to give you three particular reasons to why we think representation of these marginalized communities they talk about from their first speech are not going to be there. First and foremost, we think that when you create an inclusive ideology, more dominant narratives will suppress the minority narratives. Understand that the dominant narratives that exist, or the dominant arts that particularly exist, are going to suppress the minority narratives. Why that is particularly dangerous is because the reason why those minority people specifically created that art is not going to be expressed to the particular view. So that means that the art that will be expressed in most times will be the dominant art, not the one that is not dominant. But then second and foremost, the meaning of the art will be diluted. From our first and second speech, we tell you that art is created in order to air out your certain injustices to people. It is made in form of songs, it is made in form of art. At a point in time that you have a pool mixing everything, people will mix pleasure with pain. And at that point in time, you will be diluting the meaning of that art. Henceforth, people are likely not to understand whatever you are saying. So therefore, the safe space for that particular art is also likely to be diluted. Why? Because people that don't understand the art will still comment on the art. They will find it offensive because some of this art is against some particular people. Because some art like for the Black Lives Matter people will be different, will be against the white people. So white people will find it offensive. That means at the end of the day, you are destroying the safe space for why art is diluted. Why this particular rebuttal is important is because it removes the idea of higher representation from their side of the case. Another idea they talk about is the idea of accessibility, that people will not be able to see it. People will not be able to see it, but from their side, they have higher accessibility. We particularly tell you that accessibility is more on our side. Why? Because we have different perspectives that are being expressed. Chair, we particularly tell you that just because you listen to R&B, that does not mean you can't listen to Amapiano. That does not mean that you can't listen to pop. That does not mean you can't listen to Afrobeats. Chair, particularly, very many people listen to very many different genres because they want to pick something. If I want fun, I will go to R&B. If I want to understand where I come from, I'll go to African pop, or I will go to pop. If I want to understand how bad racism is, I will go to pop. So we necessarily tell you listening to one genre does not in any way affect how you listen to the other particular genre. But we tell you by also the nature of inclusivity, it is going to drown those particular genres. It's going to drown those particular genres. That means that only the important genres, only the genres that are popular will be expressed. That means the main instance to why the art was created in the first place, which they failed to engage with, is not going to be brought up. Why this is particularly important in the debate is because we show you at the end of the day, people have different genres that they will go to. That means to a higher extent, we have higher accessibility. If I want to know about the Blacks, I will go to the particular genre. And that means, second and foremost, it removes the idea of accessibility from their side because only the popular ideas are going to be expressed, suppressing the minority. Secondly, thirdly, on the idea of diversification, they said people from different backgrounds will work together and there will be diversification. Chair, why do you think this diversification is particularly dangerous and is likely not to happen? One,
People believe in different things. That is why art was created in particular instances. They believe in different things. But secondly, they have different messages they particularly portray, so they cannot clearly mix. Portraying fun with racism cannot clearly mix. Third and most importantly, some of them have conflicting messages. At a point in time that they have conflicting messages, there will be unnecessary backlash on the art. That means that some people will have no safe space for their particular art. Why is this particular rebuttal important? It removes the idea of the importance of diversification from their particular case. But second and most importantly, why do we think that they will harm the diverse voices? Because there will be an unnecessary backlash from people. The whites might backlash at the music that the pop does, that the pop people do. The pop music will have a high backlash from the white people, which means at the end of the day, it will have no safe space for the art. And the main instance to why the art was created is going to start being diluted. People will start backing out of using art as a means of expression. Why that is particularly important is because it nullifies out their whole impact of diversification from their side of the house. Chair, at that particular point, I will do a weigh up. Chair, I'm going to do a weigh up on diversity. Why do we still think we win diversity on a comparative of their best case against our worst case? Their best case will give us things like responsibility, accessibility, okay, if they were to fly. But even in our worst case, why we still think we have a better utility aspect is because we're going to express all perspectives. Second and most importantly, we're going to have a safe space for minority expression. So you will hear about the views of the pop music. Thirdly, the meaning of art will clearly be expressed, and it will remain. And thirdly, all perspectives will grow from our side. You can listen to pop, you can listen to amapiano, everything is at your disposal. Secondly, we win the clash of inclusivity because in their best case, the only thing they give us is a pool of art and better credibility. But we tell you that on our side, even when our case is bad, we have higher representation, we enhance messages, and we look at all genres grow with proper criticism. We have higher safe space for cultures. We have lower backlash to the art, and we have the meaning of art being expressed. That means at the end of the day, the reason to why the art was created in the first place is going to remain constant compared to their side, where the meaning of art is going to be completely diluted, and the main reason to why it was created is going to devour. We clearly show you why that inclusivity is dangerous, and they fail to engage with most of our arguments on why at best dissolving of this art is going to be dangerous, why all perspectives will go from our side, and why it particularly won't work. With this, Chair, I would like to rest my case. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's have a negative reply speech.
All right, so I'm going to begin this reply in 3, 2, 1. Panel, this was a prefers motion, so we had two worlds that were existing. The debate then shifts to the comparative of the two worlds being existent. In their world, they wanted to push for things such as responsibility, equity, representation, and very many people, and they wanted to claim that our side of the house is going to lack buy-in because there are very many things that are now going to be expressed, and thus some people are going to be disenfranchised and all that kind of stuff. We gave them a couple of reasons as to why that doesn't fly in this debate. To begin with, we told you that the logic between you expressing the needs of the disenfranchised through a blanket sort of literature doesn't play out, because you're going to be mainly expressing the majority needs in the disguise of expressing the minority needs as well. Secondly, we told you that even at best, their case isn't mutually exclusive, because from our side of the house, you can still express all your culture, all your needs, and all that sort of thing. Why is that important? It means that all perspectives can be expressed and all of them can grow, which means at best we maximize all of their benefits. They needed to have told us why their side of the house is exclusive. At a point in time, they do not prove exclusivity. We think we win on that particular instance. But even secondly, when their third speaker had a push on buying, I want us to compare buying and people's identity. I think if you're to compare buying and identity, I would rather go for my identity rather than buying, because buying is in and of itself guaranteed by people who buy, who are already of my identity, which means it is more important for you to be who you are rather than you caring about how many people perhaps call you good or how many people think you are bad. It is important for you to have an identity rather than for the magnanimous buying they were trying to push. So on a comparative, I think we beat them on that issue of buying, even if it was to stand, but it was already cleared out by my third. Now let's look at the argument sophistication. We gave you three things. One, on principle, why it is not going to work. Secondly, how our side of the house allows for expression of all perspectives, and why that was the most important paradigm within which this debate was supposed to run. Thirdly, and most importantly, we accepted their benefits and took them at their best and told them that, look, they are going to dissolve the main reason as to why art is created. At a point in time, they don't engage in one, why art was created. It means they do not understand the specific narrative within which this debate runs. But even secondly, that means they do not respect the fact that they are going to be enhancing a lot of disenfranchisement because they enhance the majority view over the minority view. In this debate, there was a more likely for the majority view to be expressed from their end, because they are allowing blanket sort of literature to be expressed, and they didn't show us any logic between the solvency of the social injustice and all the pushes that they had, which means they lost on that. But most importantly, from our side of the house, we're able to show you why art was created. The logical link then flows from there to why all people's perspectives should be important. But above that, we're also able to show you why from our side of the house, people's perspectives are going to be preached, and why that is exclusively important for self-inclusion, for benefits such as self-actualization and all those sorts. Those were the most important and exclusive benefits you get from proposition. So we can agree that on a comparative, our side of the house is able to beat them in likelihood, but secondly and most importantly, the incentive for all the actors in our side of the house are able to actively bring up what we are trying to preach rather than what they are trying to preach. And then again, if you're to compare on the problems that are brought by two worlds, their side of the house makes things worse because it allows for continuous disenfranchisement the first speaker was trying to preach about. So at the end of this debate, we are the side that is able to show you why all perspectives are important, why even in this contemporary world, expression can still be done better in our side of the house, and we're able to win this debate on all those metrics. Very proud to win from opposition. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's have the final speaker, the positive reply speech.
I'll be starting my reply speech in 3, 2, 1. So, Chair, we think that the paradigm in which this particular debate should run or it ran look like one where the establishment of either canons was best able to challenge things that already exist even in status quo, right? So, firstly, prop necessarily draws for you a word where we do not want to inherently take away these particular classics, because one, we already appreciate them, but even two, we think they're sort of important and they sort of did their work, right? But we are only bidding for some sort of consolidation for the marginalized group, just like we read from our speeches, right? We think the contemporary world that we live in is one that is already characterized by this particular kind of dominant narratives that we inherently run throughout our speeches, right? But no, I'd love you to take a look at a book written by William Shakespeare, a classic, which is a Merchant of Venice, right? We think in this particular book, it was able to portray how women were facing some sort of various injustices, which go ahead reflecting societal norms during Shakespeare's time, right? We think that contemporary books, when you look at a book like The Brief Wanderer's Life of Oshkawa, that was written by Diaz, we think this is a particular kind of book that goes ahead to sort of break those particular kind of narratives that revolve around things like culture and social life that we inherently live in, right? I'm still going to run to you two things still in my reply. It's on a comparative level on why the systemic biases still sort of exist on opposition side, and we think they're sort of very detrimental. But even number two, why we are better able to prove that lack of representation of these marginalized communities is still something very detrimental and problematic, right? So on a comparative level of why the systemic biases only exist on Oxford, right? We think at a point where OP goes ahead to insist on things like literal merit, how it should sort of be the sole criterion for things like inclusion in this particular canon, they have inherently failed to acknowledge to acknowledge the fact that the concept of literal merit has like sort of been shaped by the same systemic biases that exist in the world. This kind of systemic biases have gone ahead to exclude things like diverse voices from those particular canon. We think that is like very detrimental. That is a word we do not support. That is a word we do not like inherently want, right? We think even at a point where we are able to prove to you that lack of representation in like communities like is much more likely to be like sort of very detrimental. Because if these dominant narratives like sort of go ahead to continue, we think it becomes problematic. It's something we do not want to go ahead in this particular word, right? Now, what opposition inherently like argues is the whole idea of that particular of an inclusive canon leading to some sort of like watering down of things like literature standards, things like art, even in the first place, right? What we argue or what we tell you is the fact that hey, we think that this particular claim is like sort of based on like some sort of false dichotomy between things like diversity and even excellence in the first place, right? But we think even with the latter that intuitively in a contemporary world that we inherently live in, whereby in some sort of inclusive canon, we can go ahead to promote things like a more nuanced understanding of things like literature and academic pursuits, even in the first place, even in the vast majority of instances. We think at that point where we are able like to show you on some sort of analysis, we are able to win on those on those particular cases and those particular ideas, and we think we still have like a sort of like much more better stand than what opposition necessarily lays out for you. We did not want this classic to like sort of fade away or like sort of not be like taken into consideration. We appreciate those particular classics, but we are trying to fight for already the existing dominant narratives that go ahead to disenfranchise these marginalized groups of people, right? We think at a point where opposition does not necessarily tell you why like it is sort of like important to protect those particular kind of marginalized communities, right? Because at the point where you want to protect that particular kind of art and literature and you don't even put into consideration of how those marginalized communities are much more likely like, sort of not going to be protected, we think it becomes detrimental, something we don't want, something that is sort of like very selfish, and we still go ahead to propose for a word which looks like an inclusive word, a word which is a much better word. We are proud to propose.
All right, thank you to all of you for that lovely debate. This is a blind round, so no feedback. Just go back to the auditorium for the next round.